This is the fourth episode. We're talking about theme and through line. This is the number one literary device. This is kind of the overarching literary device, theme and through line. This is the one I had the biggest problem with in graduate school. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about thematic structure. So thematic structure is built on an idea. We're going to talk about this initially and then circle back to my experiences with it. The idea is something that we take and define based on certain qualities. I'm going to get to those in a minute. But the idea itself matches up with your other literary devices. So things like resonance, character, setting, those things all have to play into the theme, which means they're subordinate to the theme. That's why there's going to be some things in the attributes that I'm just about to list to make this process actually very difficult. And one of those is that you can't really know your theme, but you have to know your theme, which is pretty typical when you get things right, that you have some kind of paradox that you're dealing with. So I'm going to talk a lot about Hemingway's novel, Sun Also Rises. The history is that Hemingway didn't really write the theme, but the book, standing on its own, is a really good example of a subtle theme and a definite through line, and kind of what makes the book. And what that means is the resonance is there with the theme, the character plays into the theme, and the setting definitely plays into the theme. You gotta remember, Sun Also Rises was Spain, bullfighting, drinking, debauchery. There were a couple main characters. One of them was a boxer who loses his shit in the end and punches everybody over a girl. But that character and those movements within the plot play really well into the theme, which isn't perfectly articulated. So let's jump into these attributes. Attribute number one, when you're considering theme, is don't make it too personal. So in graduate school, you always get these short stories about people's personal experiences and their own sadness and their own trauma and their own kind of breakup, medical condition, things like this. It's not that people don't care. It's that when it's about the writer, the reader actually feels it. The reader feels that you're too into your own pain at the time and you're out of control with what we're talking about, which is the overarching theme and the literary devices underneath it. So don't get too personal. Number two is don't get something answerable. A super simple question. I'm going to tell you what some of these questions are in a minute, but something like proving there's a God as your theme because you're really attached to the God concept. Most people that are religious already think there is one, so you're not really proving much. And people that don't aren't going to be interested in your book at all. So that actually falls under the too personal category, but certainly under the answerable. When you're picking questions, which is what these thematic choices for the writer really are, you want to pick things that are more philosophical than scientific. That's the best way to explain it. Number three, don't pick super simple questions. So when you're thinking about that question, don't pick something simple like how you grate carrots. So this was actually my problem at graduate school, was I couldn't wrap my brain around a kind of open-ended philosophical theme because I hadn't gone through any philosophy training. And I was fairly new to creative writing. I mean, it wasn't new, but I was new at the graduate level and I wasn't in a program yet. And my mind was inundated with this idea of theme, resonance, through line, and deeper questions that don't have simple answers. So science questions like how you cook a dish, how you cure a disease, all of these things are super simple. There's a great example. My favorite book, I've got like 50 favorite books. It's called Mustang Sally. It's an unknown novel about a guy that goes to Las Vegas because he's going to get fired from his job and he's helping his friend out whose daughter has become a hooker. I don't need to tell you anymore about the book, but he talks about grading papers. He's an English professor, but he's giving them big ideas like I would try to do here for you to explore with your theme. And so he asked them to come up with their idea of a complicated, deeper question. And one of the papers that he flunked, no, I think he gives them all A's to get out of it. But one of the papers we know he should have flunked is a student that's talking about how all things happen in groups of threes, how there's a coincidence in the world in groups of threes, and just rants about it for a page and a half and turns that in as his term paper. So that's a perfect example of a question that's really philosophical. And so what I tell writers is learn philosophy. Don't become a PhD in philosophy, but that's part of this channel is you're looking at it from a fundamental standpoint. Like when you talk about theme and you're talking about those choices you have to make as a writer, coming up with an idea about theme and then craft that idea, but then not be 100% aware of what you're even crafting. First of all, if you have that philosophy foundation, you're going to have a better idea what those questions might look like. So number 4, and this is really what I've been talking about throughout the first 3 attributes, is the most important attribute, and that is that these themes overall aren't solvable. So if your theme is evil, or if your theme is sadness, which is a little broad, but for the sake of this, let's talk about it. If that's your theme, those questions aren't fully answered. And the more you wrap your brain around the fact that they're not answered, let me explain. So let's say evil. When you watch a superhero movie, your characters, the bad guy's evil and the protagonist, the good guy, is good, right? It's really delineated and simple. But in real life, it's not like that. So insofar as we try to capture this realism, we try to paint a picture, we try to answer a real question, that evil has to come along with what else there is, which is to say, nobody's just evil. Even a serial killer has a good side, has sense of humor, can make friends, can do all these things. Not always, but I'm saying you want to round out your idea. And you do that by not choosing a simple answer. So a great way to test this is to read other people's short stories and novels and say what that theme is. I'm going to give you some examples. I'm going to give you an example of a really easy one to determine and a really hard one to determine. It's weird because I actually like the one that's easy to determine better. But as a new writer, you definitely want to stay away from the simple one word. What's this short story about? Sadness. Nope. Then you pick the wrong theme, or you're not aware enough of your theme material to craft something with all your other techniques to make it affect people in the way that art is supposed to affect them. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. One is the movie Sideways. It's based on a book by an author named Rex Pickett, who, as always is the case, I hate reading books on my favorite movies. It's a terrible book. I read the first couple pages and I knew it'd be bad. And so I know the director, he's the same director that directed About Schmidt. The director really crafted it the same way the director of Fight Club crafted it, and Chuck Palahniuk wrote a joke, like a superficial book. But there were themes in that. In Sideways, the Rex Pickett book has some of these themes, but they're not developed. They're not literary. The writing is not very good. But the movie, to me, is the best movie ever made. And it's a great example of a theme that beats you over the head, which means you could say fairly clearly what the theme's about, because the theme is about temporality, about the pathos of temporality, which means my life's going to end someday. Can't change the temporary nature or the mortal nature of what I'm dealing with. Getting things done in the time that you're given, doing the best with that time, being happy with that time. All of these things play into this idea that his life goes sideways instead of forward or back. And so I think that's where you get the title. That's where you get the theme. There is a lot of depth to it in such a way that you could find some nuance in it, but it still beats you over the head. The speech, when they're on the couch, Virginia Madsen and the main character are on the couch, and he's talking about how wine ages and improves with time and then goes downhill after that. That's when you really get the mortality thing beating you over the head. Juxtapose that with Hemingway's Sun Also Rises, which is about, it starts out with the boxer talking about being a boxer, but getting lost in this debauchery in Spain. And then at the end of the book, he's drunk, like everyone is throughout the whole book. He's in a position, he's jealous about the girl and the other main character getting the girl. And so he punches everybody. And so that plays with this theme of bullfighting in such a way that animals instinctively react and they do things that are outside their intellectual control. And I think that's the point that Hemingway or Hemingway's editor was trying to make. But it was really corralled in The Sun Also Rises, but it wasn't given a name. So when I tried to describe the theme in Sun Also Rises, I can't say mortality. I really have to say, well, it's kind of instinct, animalness, how much humans go by. When you describe the theme, you actually start to work on what the question even means. And that's where the depth pays off. And that's why Sun Also Rises is often considered his best book, probably because it's not so subtle. I don't like Hemingway because when you look at his short stories, they really are about life only, camera, angle, take a picture. And he admits this. He says, you just take a picture of life and the theme and the through line come out of that. You're not in control of it. I think that's bullshit. But when you read modern minimalist writers like Joyce Carol Oates will even say, there's a lot of crafting. And it really is, you do the writing first, which is the easy part, and you craft later, which means you find the theme maybe in your rough draft, and then you craft that into something. So my experience in graduate school is I couldn't figure out theme. I couldn't figure out how it related to bigger ideas, what these bigger ideas would look like, how to ask that question, how that would play out through the literary techniques. I had no idea. And so I actually had to withdraw from a class because I kept failing at coming up with the paper. We had to do 2 papers, and I couldn't find theme in nature writing books. And they were nonfiction, but they were crafted with literary stylings, which is very common, and I could not put it together. But I'll go into that in other videos when you talk more about how the theme and the through line really look, and then how they actually interact with the resonance, character setting, and everything else. I hope that gives you an introduction to theme.